Welcome to The Quest. I'm your host, Justin Kahn. The Quest is a podcast about exploring the journeys of the people around me, and today my guest is Ranidu Lankage. Ranidu is one of my closest friends, and I am super excited to introduce him to you. Ranidu is one of the most supportive people I know, and also one of the most persistent, and I really love that about him. We went to college together, but really got to know each other afterwards when he was at Google and I was building startups in San Francisco, and eventually we went on to start a company together. Ranidu has one of the most interesting stories out there. Before he was my co-founder of Whale, the video Q&A app we started, Ranidu was a pop star in his native country of Sri Lanka during the Civil War. And in our conversation, we discussed what it was like to grow up in an active conflict, becoming a famous musician, how he got into tech, what didn't work out about Whale, the lessons he learned from founding companies, especially while having kids, and more. And now here's my conversation with Ranidu. We've known each other for a long time.
Long time now.
Co-founders of companies together.
Yes.
Started a bunch of different projects. Went to college together.
Yep.
But before all of that, I want to just start with who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You're from Sri Lanka.
Yep. From Sri Lanka, born and bred.
And people here don't know it now that you work in tech, but you are a pop star, a legitimate pop star in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I guess.
You were before you came over to tech, you had a second career, or first career.
Yeah.
As a famous Sri Lankan singer and celebrity.
Yeah, you could say that.
And then you came here to work in tech. So tell me, I don't know, just tell me, let's start off with who you are. What's your background? Right. Where are you from?
I was born in Colombo, Sri Lanka, which is the capital. I grew up, my family, I have one sister, younger sister who's about 19 months younger than I am. It was a very interesting time to grow up in Sri Lanka, because we had a war the whole time I was there. And my dad was part of the army as well. So he started as an officer and sort of kind of went up the ranks and ended up as a one-star general. There were some effects of being, there were some effects on my life of being a part of a military family and having a dad in the army and stuff during a war.
You've told me some crazy stories from that time. So what was it like to be in an active war zone growing up? So
I wouldn't call Colombo an active war zone. I think the north and the east of the country was really where it was all going down. But the Tamil Tigers, who was the rebel group that we were fighting, invented suicide bombing, right? So we grew up around this crazy, atmosphere in Colombo where, life would be normal for a period of time, and then you would suddenly get a big bomb blast somewhere. They'll drive a truck into some a place or near our school, or someone would get shot, or crazy things would happen all the time. But one thing you build up is resilience and the whole society as a whole, right? Because the bomb blast happens on Monday, and then everybody's kind of worried on Tuesday, but Wednesday, school opens again and you just go back.
So it's just part of life.
It just became part of life, yeah.
And you didn't feel did people have PTSD from it? Was this happening every week, every month, every year?
At least every year, I would say. But yeah, it was happening pretty regularly. And I think culturally, I don't know. I feel in America, you actually share these things and people kind of talk about it openly. Our culture is not like that. So people just kind of hold it in or just ignore it and just kind of move on like it didn't happen. They kind of talk about it with family and stuff, but, people just go about living. And I bet especially in the sort of the males in the culture don't really share openly. That's just not a thing. And especially and then you take that, and then you also my dad was part of the army, so they share even less, right?
So it wasn't a vulnerable culture.
No, I don't think so. I think that's something new for me that I learned from my friends here, like you, and friends in America, that it was okay to share these things you were going through and be more open about what you're going through.
Yeah. And so what was it like to have a dad in the Army who was a general in the Army?
I mean, it was kind of interesting. On the one hand, you got exposure to these things that you probably wouldn't in if not, was super into sports. So he would make me play a bunch of sports when I was a kid, but with soldiers. So he'd be like, oh, you're like 15, you're old enough, so you can go now play rugby with a full grown man, which obviously was not fun for me. Right? Right? Or squash, or like these random British sports almost were super popular in Sri Lanka.
So wait, he would make you play like against people in his troop?
Yeah, exactly. That was my summer, because we didn't have a summer when school was out. He'd be like, you're going to go to the sports complex at the Army, like the headquarters, where he used to work at that point. And he was like, you're just going to play sports all day with soldiers. So not kids my age. And
wow.
that's how he kept me out of trouble, I guess.
And then tell me about what it was like, you know, when you were growing up. What do you think you were going to do when you were an adult?
That's a good question. So I don't know if I had a plan, right? So my mom worked at one of the biggest commercial banks there. Just, she was a banker. That definitely did have an influence on me as well. I played a lot of sports. I did music. My dad's philosophy was like, you just got to do everything under the sun, and I'm just going to expose you to a lot of stuff and then let you sort of almost figure out your path, which is kind of different for parents in Sri Lanka there. Actually, a lot of my peers, they would just be like, you're either going to be a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer or something like that. It was like very pre-planned. I think my parents were a little bit more liberal in that. They were like, okay, well, we don't care what you do. And I think your mom has told you this as well, like, just do it to your best, right? And just try to be the best at it. So I don't think I had a plan. I was just doing a lot of different things. But one thing I did know was there was this feeling of like, okay, well, the war is going on. We don't know what's going to happen here. And a lot of folks, especially in Colombo, who could go abroad to study or afford to do that, were trying to just, go somewhere else. And most people went to the UK or Australia. I think America was just not, sort of the system wasn't really what we followed. Like, we followed the British education system. And people were just like, those people would leave. The other folks would either just get a job out of school, and then there were these British certification systems that were like very popular, like SIM and SEMA, which was become an accountant or something like that. Very, very small percentage went to college in Sri Lanka. So I was in this interesting situation where I don't think my parents could have afforded to send me to school in the UK or Australia or whatever. So I was like, okay, well, if I want to get out, I got to get a scholarship somewhere, or I got to get into the college there. So I did work hard. There's this exam called the A levels where you got to like score at the top of the whatever list, right? In whatever stream you take. So I took business, and about 200,000 kids take this exam, and I think about 8,000 or less get into school, college in Sri Lanka, which is the government university. Yeah. I did well at that, and I got in there. But then, fortunately, I got into school here, and that wasn't really planned. I actually remember that. I can tell you that story if that's interesting, like the coming to the US story.
Yeah, but before that, you were actually, by that time, you were successful as an artist, right?
Yeah, so in school, I started doing music.
How'd you get into music? Were your parents into it?
My parents, it's so funny. Like, my family is not very musical. I didn't have anyone who played instruments or anything. My mom literally just bought me a keyboard one day and said, play.
Just in the vein of trying everything, experimenting with everything.
That's
just a keyboard showed up and she was like, go at it.
Yeah, go at it. figure it out. And then there was like a band in school as well. But yeah, it was just very organic. I just started playing with friends and just listening to stuff, and I've like self-taught, right? Like, so I just started listening to records and trying to play it back.
So what kinds of music were you listening to?
So my mom actually played everything at home, which actually helped me. And so my dad went to study 3 to 6 months in the UK, and my mom went with him. So like we just got left behind. My sister and I were just with my grandma for 6 months. But when they came back, my mom bought a bunch of tapes from the UK. So like ABBA, Michael Jackson, George Michael. I mean, it's just like a lot of great stuff, which I don't think a lot of kids would have had exposure to, right? And then she would play those tapes. And then also like there was this local music scene that they, Gypsies and a few other bands in Sri Lanka that they liked. And they were just playing those records all the time at home. And those are the ones I pretty much grew up on.
So you started playing music in school and you were just trying to recreate the music that you heard your parents were playing.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then when did you start thinking like I should create my own music?
So I think it was when I was like maybe 15 again. Like my mom just was like, not a lot of kids, by the way, had computers, and she bought a computer, which was like a super luxury at that point, right? And then I figured out how to download like some MIDI random software.
Like Fruity Loops or something like that?
The equivalent of that, and started messing around more or less how kids get into it today, but we didn't have the internet to learn. And then she found someone through a mutual friend who was an electronic musician in Sri Lanka, which was pretty much like, I know how to like hook up a keyboard to a MIDI controller or like a MIDI thing, and then like hook it up to a computer, so I can show you how to do that, right? So I kind of learned a little bit from him, and then I just pretty much just like, because I was making up tunes in my head already, just started making stuff. And then I grew up in the first part of my life, I was in this kind of army sort of compound kind of complex with other kids whose parents were also in the army. And then my neighbor there was pretty much one of the first pop groups in Sri Lanka. So I made a bunch of like demo stuff and I sent it to him, and he was like, hey, this is good. Like, do you want to do a song with us? And these guys are just literally coming out, and they got signed to Sony, which was like the first group to get signed to Sony in Sri Lanka, like an international label. And it was Sony India, actually. And then they were like, oh, I like this one song, and pretty much took it and we reworked it in a real studio, which was my first experience there. And then pretty much put it on the radio, and it just like went from there.
How old were you when that happened?
Probably like 17.
And this is in the late 90s?
Yeah, 17, 18. Yeah, something like that.
And international record labels were just starting to get into
Sri Lanka. Yeah, exactly. So the India label set up a sub label in Sri Lanka because they were interested in the market. There's about 20 million people who live there, so they wanted to penetrate that market. So that's how we pretty much ended up getting signed to Sony India.
And then you got signed. Like after that one song? Yeah,
pretty much. So I started working with those guys. That song blew up, and then I like toured with them a lot before sort of Sony again approached me and said, hey, do you want to do your own album? I always wanted to do it because I wanted to do a slightly different sound from them, more R&B, and kind of just have my own thing, I guess. I always had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit I think I got from my mom. She was just always hustling.
So were you inspired at this point from the Western music then, from like the US?
Yes, and then I also weirdly, I also got into like electronic music pretty early. So Sri Lanka didn't have a ton of radio stations, like English radio stations. But I think when I was growing up, literally there was like 2 or 3 for the whole country, right? But one of them would play techno, electronic, like Tiesto, from midnight till 3 a.m. on Saturdays, right? And I would just always listen to that show. And then I like really, really got into electronic music. So that actually really influenced me. Like the first few records, all of this stuff that I was messing around on the computer was mostly electronic music. I was trying to make like Sinhalese or Sri Lankan electronic music.
Back in like in
Back
the
in
late
the
90s.
90s, I guess. Yeah.
So when you came out with this stuff, were old people just like, what is going on?
Yeah, it was always like, what is this stuff? It was just like so out there when I started. But I think over time, what I realized was, especially working with the other band, like I figured out like what the general audience wanted, and I try to blend what I wanted to do with sort of what they could handle almost.
So,
Right.
like, how did you know what the audience wanted? Like the audience of, I guess you would say, young people who are listening
Right.
to pop music.
So I think they wanted melodies first of all, and then like they wanted songs, right? Not just like beats and like that kind of house music structure. I got that sense from touring with the other band, right? Because they were making pop music, and I could sort of see what the crowd reacted to. I mean, I played like hundreds of shows.
So you were going around as like 17 years old,
Yeah, just like
touring hundreds of shows around Sri Lanka
Yeah.
while there was like a military conflict.
pretty much.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like touring? What's the energy like in a country where there is that, kind of active conflict going on?
I think again that kind of this sense of like ignoring everything and just like partying on or going on like life is okay. You could see that, right? Like people would still go out and go to shows and go try to live a normal life, even though there was like this crazy war going on. I think in the war zones, it wasn't the same experience, but for 2/3 of the country, it was just, okay, well, we get bombed sometimes, but otherwise we're just gonna go out, have our family things and go to the show and like enjoy life, right? I feel like there's this real sense of resilience in Sri Lanka. Like there's always bad stuff that happens, but people just, I guess like you don't have a choice. You just have to get up and keep going.
Yeah, it reminds me of Israel, actually, visiting
Yeah.
Israel, and how when I visited there, obviously there's a huge amount of security
Right.
in the country and armed soldiers everywhere, but people are just kind of living their life and trying to live as best they can.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you're making music, you put out your album,
Yeah.
and it does well.
Yeah. So I made music, and then actually I got into college then. So
yeah.
tough choice, right?
So you apply to colleges in the U.S. So
Yeah.
you're actively like now a celebrity,
Yeah.
and you're famous in Sri Lanka, which is a
Right.
pretty small country. And you are decided, like you also apply to college in the
Yeah,
U.S.
I also applied to college because I didn't even think about that as not a choice. Like going to college was not going to college was not a choice.
You're good Asian, like people are
exactly.
Your,
Right.
your parents had instilled that into you that you were going to go to college.
Yeah. And but they thought I was going to go to college in Sri Lanka, right? Like I said, like I don't think they could have afforded it. So, and then I was in that track to get in, and I actually did well at that the A levels. I was actually I think in Sri Lanka I was the third
of the whole country.
Yeah.
Like, and there's 8,000 students. That you said
there was like
take it?
100,000 students. who
third of
took it.
100,000.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, I get into school there. I don't apply to most colleges because they don't offer financial aid in like the UK and Australia. Randomly, my best friend growing up, he was like, I think I'm gonna go to the US because his brother went to MIT, and he was like, I'm gonna take this test called the SAT. And like we have no college prep. There's no sense of what you need to do. No, there's no college counselor, guidance counselor. My teachers don't even speak English, even though I went to the biggest public school in Sri Lanka, like most of them didn't, right? So I get a torn up SAT book that's probably 5 years older version from this guy. And I'm like, okay, well, if you're doing it, let me just like take that test as well. So I like study for it and I take it. And then figure out from him how to apply. I literally I didn't have a printer or anything at home. So I remember like writing the college applications by hand
Yeah.
right? On the paper. The essay I wrote in like maybe a day, because I didn't know that the college essay was a big deal, and I actually wrote just what I felt,
Yeah.
which was, I remember it was like, what would you change about the world? I wrote about the conflict and sort of going through what we had to go through in Sri Lanka with my dad, and being in the army and all of this stuff that I, kind of touched on. And then also was like, I wish for world peace, because it's like I've seen this conflict and it's wreaking havoc in my country. And so anyway, I write the thing in just like a day. And I remember it was just like the postmark deadline, and almost missed it. And my mom had to actually ask someone to, like, as the mailbag was closing for the day, because you had to postmark by 5 o'clock on a certain day. It was like 5:15 when we got there, and they were closing up, and she had to like ask the guy to open the bag, and we threw it in, and yeah, that's a few months later. I get a letter, and it's like, you got in to Yale, where we went, and I think that changed my life really.
So, how did your parents react when you got into Yale?
My mom was overjoyed. They didn't really know that it was a big deal. Like, I remember, actually, this is a funny story too. Like, my dad was stationed outside of like the main city at that point. So he was gone a lot, right? Like, during the war, like, he was gone for months. And I remember talking to him on the phone, and he's like, "Are you going to go?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Dude, I just got in here. And then I had to like educate him on like what the college was and like how big of an opportunity it is. But like, obviously, I think I benefited from like Yale's policies, right? Like, there's no way they could have sent me there if they had to raise the money for it. So,
how many Sri Lankans get to go to Yale? How many were in our
I
class?
was the 7th ever. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that was the first time. Had you been out of the country before?
No, I actually, I think by the time I came here, I had been out of the country. But yeah, I think I went to like, I'm trying to remember where I went. I think I went to Singapore or somewhere once. And then with the band, with the other band that I toured with, we went to Kazakhstan, of all places, for some music competition.
I think you told me that
Yeah,
once.
it's so hilarious, because it's so like such a like out of the way place to go to. But they have this music competition for like Asian bands, and that was in Kazakhstan that year, and we went to that. Those are the only 2 places I had been to.
And so, what were you going to do with your music career? Or what were you thinking you were going to do?
I mean, I was like,
because at this point you were signed to a label, right?
I was, but I guess like being signed to a label there is not like being signed to a label here, right? You sign to a label, essentially what you get is, we're going to like make your CD and we're going to put it in stores. The rest is up to you, right? Yeah. Versus being signed to Universal, if you're like the most priority artist here, or like say a Sony and you're Beyonce, like they're doing everything for you, right? They're pushing you, and a lot of people's kind of livelihoods depend on you and stuff. So it was kind of different. Like, you still kind of, it was almost like indie, but you were signed to this label, and they kind of gave you like there was an expectation that you would make X amount of albums. So I mean, how I thought about it was like, I can always fulfill this obligation in the summer, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have to tell these guys.
So you're like, I'm just going to go to school because that's a smart career move, or a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
And then I'll just figure this music stuff out on the side.
Right. Exactly. Which is kind of, I mean, it was still hard. I wanted to do music, but then again, like, I felt the conflict inside of me, as well as like for parents, there was a no-brainer, right? Like, you're going to school, right?
Yeah.
But there's this kind of tug of war between like what you wish you can do in the moment and what's kind of right in the long term. And I think I've had to go through that for like a long period of time. Like, I had that conflict, right? Should I have stayed and just like done music? Because I had a bunch of friends who just did that and did pretty well.
How are they doing?
They're doing great. I mean, at that point though, like, the market wasn't that huge. For what we were doing, and we were just like almost like pioneering this type of music, like hip hop, R&B, like Western sounding music in Sri Lanka in our language. And just starting to get our sound out to India and like other regional places and just tour and all this stuff. But the war was still this thing that was hanging over your head, right? Because then a bomb would go out and then there won't be shows for like a little while at least, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a big consideration for me as well, because I was like, I don't know when this thing is going to end, because by the time I left, it was on for, I want to say like 18 years at that point, pretty much since I was born. And then, it went on for another 10 years after that.
So you decided the choice, you took the path of stability.
Right,
basically,
pretty much, yeah.
Which was to come to the U.S., go to an excellent college,
Yeah.
get an education, and then just try to work out the music stuff on the side.
Right.
Were you able to do that?
I think I did the best I could. And I think I'm still kind of, to this date, sometimes I think I get frustrated because I wasn't able to fully focus on it ever.
Yeah.
Other than like before I went to college, right? And then during college, every summer I didn't have summer jobs in the US. I would just like go back, record an album, be in the studio, promote, be on TV, do music videos, that was my summer, every summer.
That's kind of every college student's dream. Like you're going back, you're basically living the life where you're in New Haven, Connecticut.
Yes.
First time living abroad.
Yeah.
What was it like to be there? But then you're going back in the summers and you're being like a pop celebrity.
Pretty much. It was like two lives, right? Like,
yeah.
And I think I've had that experience like my whole life pretty much until like recently, where it's like when I go to Sri Lanka, like I'm a different person than when I live here.
Yeah.
Right? Like here I'm just like, I was just a regular college student. I played squash on the team and just like try to do like all these clubs and societies and just be a normal college student. I mean, other than like, I think even at school, like I was DJing a lot and just got into music a lot there, but I wasn't like a celebrity here or anything, right? Like I was just like a regular college student. And then when I went home, I would land at the airport and like sign autographs and then like...
Would people would know you, or they recognize you?
Yeah, I would just like land, they would recognize me, and then life would be different when I got home, right?
Yeah.
For the 3 months or whatever. And then it was just like full stop, back to school, studying and just kind of doing that again.
So when you graduated, were you thinking like you should go music full time?
So I thought about it, but again, I don't know. I think it's like I wanted to stay here, and that wasn't a viable option, right? It was like, again, like, do you want to stay in America or you want to go home and be a celebrity, right?
Yeah, and like most people, I think would choose like go home and be a celebrity.
Right?
You don't think so?
I think if you grow up in America, yes, right? But I think maybe it's the motivation as well for me. Like the motivation was not to be a celebrity. That's not why I made music. When I started making music was I just had a passion for music and just making things, and then also like impacting sort of the culture there. And I felt like, I don't know why, but like the records, like even if I didn't promote them, or some of the stuff I was doing even after college while I was working, would still reach a lot of people just based on the song, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, because it's a smaller market without me being there. So that actually helped in some ways to be okay with that decision. But I like I said, I don't think I've still fully resolved that conflict, right? Like should I just be a musician or be who I am here? But I think over time I've realized, I could do both and be happy, and that's sort of where I've settled, right? Like to try and do the best at whatever I'm doing in the moment.
Yeah. So you ended up deciding I want to stay in the U.S. and then did the classic Yale thing and got a job in finance.
Yeah, got a job on Wall Street.
Just because like that was where the momentum was.
Right. Like think about being at Yale at that time, right? Like most of your friends, where are you going after graduation? And they're like, I'm going to New York and I'm going to do consulting or banking, right? And I think like my mom being a banker kind of influenced me as well. But I think I was still at the point trying to figure out who I was, and growing up in a culture where you're like almost like safety and this kind of stability is drilled into you, like that's the thing you should do. So like undoing some of that was hard, right? Like I was almost like trained to be sort of follow a path.
Yeah.
And like the first break of that was doing music, right? Which is not something that people in Sri Lanka like think of as a viable career. But then later on, like I sort of kind of got to where I was by sort of almost undoing some of that training of following safety, right?
Right.
And stability. Yeah.
And then after, so you worked in finance for a couple years.
Yeah.
Then what you came to the West?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think my best friend growing up in Sri Lanka, he was at Google at that point. He had gone to Stanford and gotten a job at Google as an engineer. And he was just like, hey, you should come out west. And the first time I like came to visit, I remember being over California, looking down and going, this place looks beautiful. And then like after that first week, I just wanted to be here. And so I went back, and then he was at Google. Like I said, my friend was at Google, and he was like, you should apply here. So he kind of referred me, and then I figured out like a random role that I guess they interviewed me for in one of the groups, and just took it, right, on a whim, and just came out to California. And that was another break, right? Like I think I was kind of trying to, the right path, I think, after 2 years was to become an associate or go do an MBA. Like that's what people are doing. And I decided, no, I'm just going to like instead go to Google. Like Google was big, but not like the biggest company in the world at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like my dad, again, didn't know what Google was.
Yeah.
Right at that point. He's living in Sri Lanka, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to like take this job at Google versus staying in New York, right? And doing another banking job or like kind of going to school again. And then yeah, he was like, I don't know what that company is. Like, what are you sure? You know, you want to take this? Why you moved to California? Like, yeah, I think I've just like over time being like, this is the thing that I want to do. So that was one of those big steps as well. I think kind of getting out here
to Silicon Valley, and then
yeah.
I mean, this whole time you're releasing music still.
All my vacation, and like even when I was on Wall Street, I remember like I was working with a bunch of rappers in New York that I found on MySpace at that point. And I would just like go to these random studios in like Brooklyn and the Bronx late at night, and then I would just like sleep for like 2 or 3 hours and go back to my desk on Wall Street as an analyst at like 7 a.m. It's just like two different lives like the whole time. I released 2 albums, I think, after college as well. So I released 2 when I was there at Yale, and then afterwards I released 2 more.
And then so while you were at Google, I remember, I mean, this is kind of when we connected more.
Yeah.
After school, you were like working at your job in Treasury at Google.
Right, in Treasury,
like managing Google's massive amount of money.
Money, yeah.
But then you were also like hustling to make connections with artists.
Yes.
While you were like by using Google, basically.
Right, pretty much by using Google. So I remember this guy who was a good friend of mine in new business development was like, don't think about what you're doing at this company. Think about what you can do. I think it was a good and like what you can use this name to do that is also lined up with what you want to do, right?
That sounds like something out of Silicon Valley.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like your job function is X. That is irrelevant. You can just say that you work at Google, and you can just invent whatever position you want, which is in line with what you want to do. So if it's music BD or talking to artists or making connections, you can do that. No one is holding you back. Like your job is to take care of Google's money, but that doesn't mean you can do this you cannot do this other stuff. So he's kind of was the first guy to give me that kind of push to do that. And then, I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to all these festivals and I have opportunities to meet these artists, but then how can I help them from me being at Google, right? And especially in the electronic scene, and not a lot of them had connections at YouTube or Google, because I mean, these teams aren't that huge in terms of artist relations, so they had to cover, Beyonce and Madonna, but not maybe say an Avicii or Tiesto. Like at that point, electronic music was just like coming up in the US for the second time.
Yeah, it was like 2010 to 2012.
Exactly,
like that, yeah.
exactly. And so there wasn't a lot of coverage there. So I was just like, oh, this is an opportunity. I can just like help these guys like connect with the right people at YouTube. So I ended up helping a bunch of festivals like Ultra and these electronic artists like make connections and do projects with Google. While I was there in my 20% time, I guess.
So your 20% project was basically connecting with doing music business development.
Yeah, for these artists in the electronic space with Google.
That was hilarious. How did anyone at Google care?
They didn't. I mean, they didn't in that I would sort of go through the right channels after they came in. Like my job was almost done at that point, right? Like it was just like, okay, I went and first met a bunch of people at YouTube and said like, hey, what's your job and what are the types of things you guys are interested in? And I also explained to them that I was meeting these people and could I send them to you? So I made those relationships internally, and then externally when I met the right people and had thought of a right opportunity, I would just like put these people together. So I don't think it was like anyone really internally was like threatened by it or anything. Yeah.
But I remember you got Ultra sponsored by Google.
Google, yeah.
I think you did some stuff with the VG, right? And Tiesto.
Right. Yeah, when it was pretty early on. And Tiesto as well for Google Play launch, and did a bunch of stuff. I got Hardwell to do a mix for Google Play and put it on the front page worldwide on Google Play.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is my part-time hustle at Google.
Nice. Then, so how did you make the transition to being an entrepreneur?
I actually always wanted to start something. I just had this itch the whole time. But again, I think a lot of people go through this. Like I was on an H-1B at Google, which kind of almost prevents you from starting a startup unless you like want to take. I know people who have figured out ways to start a startup while being on an H-1B. So there's nothing you cannot do. But so I kind of was like also waiting for that whole thing to happen. And as soon as it happened, I was like always thinking of ideas and I was trying to spin up stuff with friends. But I think like, you had been here for a while and also worked on a bunch of startups. And once I sort of met you and we were talking about different ideas, I felt like that was a better way for me to start something because you had learned from your previous startups versus trying to start something just like without an idea, right? Without a friend who had done it. I guess in some ways that's how it came together. I was just like always thinking about it, but didn't make the leap. And then I think one thing I learned about is you're like really, really good at motivating people to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of the talks we had was when I was like, it's now or never. I just got to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm super glad I did again.
So we started talking because you were into music and I was super into electronic music.
Right.
And at the time, I guess I was like every other tech person who becomes kind of successful. They're like trying to figure out how to become a DJ or how to get into music, which is like where all the cool kids were.
Yeah.
Every musician at the time was like trying to figure out how they could get some tech money.
Right.
To like, get closer to tech. And so that was how we connected. And we started talking about, different apps or social apps or different ways that people could discover music.
Right.
And, then we started working on this project called The Drop at first, which was a kind of like daily distribution. Yeah. Like a daily song of the day.
Song of the day. Yeah, pretty much.
And then that turned into almost like a Reddit for music.
Yeah. I remember the first one you actually built yourself with Damien.
Yeah, Damien and I, my brother Damien and I built the first the Song of the Day app,
Yeah.
which is kind of an interesting idea. It was kind of like, I guess, like Hype Machine,
Yeah.
something like that. But what is our lesson learned there? I mean, the TLDR for the readers is none of these things worked.
Yeah, none of these things worked.
None of these things really worked. I think we were, for me, if I was to say what the lessons were of this, we were I was really trying to figure out how to force something to work in music. Like I really wanted something to work in music instead of really building something from an internal need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like where there's like a true internal need of like something that I want myself to see in the world for some reason.
Right. I think we were like kind of starting with the idea versus starting with a problem.
Right. Yes.
Right. And that's a trap that I think a lot, I mean, to this date, like you have to double check, especially now that I've learned a lot about product, is like, am I just chasing an idea or am I trying to solve a problem? And it's hard because you get excited about ideas. Right. Ideas are what kind of spur you into action and like almost make you want to solve the problem. And it's not necessarily natural for most people who are, especially like creatives, because creative stuff happens out of ideas.
Right.
It's not because of problems, right? So, and I think you're pretty creative as well, and that's why I think we start from ideas.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of companies start from problems.
Right. Like a lot of successful companies,
Exactly.
anyways, start from problems. That's a really good observation. It's kind of the opposite of the music industry in a way.
Right.
Or
Exactly.
or Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's all ideas, right? It's like, that's what spurs, like people come together, they get super excited about the idea and then start working on the project, right?
Right.
Because the idea is sort of how a story forms or a song forms or a book forms.
Yeah.
Right? Creative pursuits. I think startups are still like that, but I think the best startups though
come from a real problem.
And
someone's trying to solve a real
Or you
problem.
get super lucky, which is what happens in consumer, and you end up solving a problem that you didn't even know that existed.
Like Twitch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Justin TV and Twitch. We got kind of super lucky. I think we had, it started off as an idea, or like Justin TV did, like let's make our own live reality broadcast.
Right.
That wasn't solving anyone's problem. And we just kind of morphed it over time, luckily, into something that did solve a problem.
Right.
But it was pretty random at first, that we got down that path.
But ideas still, I do want to stress, I think ideas inspire people. And without them, you wouldn't be able to get people, or like if you're not able to articulate an idea and get people excited about it, you wouldn't be able to get people to join you and start the thing in the first place.
Yeah.
So as an entrepreneur, I think you have to talk about both the problem, but also the ideas that solve the problem in a way that it's inspirational to the people that work with you.
Yeah.
Right? If you just talk about the problem too, I don't think I don't think talking about problems is inspirational.
Right.
Right? It's like, oh man, this thing sucks and like I really want to solve it. But if you only kept focusing on like this is a problem and not really some ideas about the solution.
Yeah. That's not sufficient.
Yeah.
So we built in that company a bunch of different things. Most of them failed.
Right.
Including they all kind of failed, but the one that was most successful actually was this thing called the Artist Union, which was kind of solving a problem of helping artists promote their music online.
That's right. The original mission of the company, by the way, as well.
Just wasn't a very good business. Maybe it was like too small of a market.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we built Whale, which was this video Q&A app.
Yeah.
Which was helping. It was basically allowing people to pay each other to answer questions by video, like short 1-minute videos.
Right. And again, I think even that. We did have a theme, by the way. This was never, I think, we didn't really set out or like set up this is the company mission and we're going to solve this problem. But I feel like most of the things we ended up working on was to solve this kind of problem for artists or creative people to either promote themselves or make money or monetize their audience. There was a theme.
Yeah.
right? So Whale was similar, right? Like we were like, well, this initially it was like, okay, if we can get this tool to artists and celebrities so that their fans can then interact with them, ask them questions, and they can potentially monetize.
And it didn't work though.
Yeah.
People liked it. There was this core segment of users that like it, and a lot of people, I get pinged on Twitter occasionally. Someone is like, "What happened? This was like such a great app."
I still get at least one ping per week on average.
It was kind of adjacent to some of the things that are working, like Cameo, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a startup that lets you ask celebrities to give shout outs to your friends or family or whatever.
Yeah.
And pay them for it. That company is doing really well.
Really, really well. Yeah.
So what did we fuck up? Like, what was wrong? What did we do wrong?
What do you think we fucked up?
Well, it's hard to say. I think we didn't target. I think they're targeting something different, which is they have more of an explicit use case, which was instead of asking a question, it's more like giving a shout out to a specific person.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting because that's something you can like learn how to do. I think users need to be, you have to make your product very simple and explain how to use it. Right. And I think when things are open-ended, a lot of times it's really difficult for people to know how to use your thing. Right. So here it was like that. Anyone could ask anyone any type of question.
Yeah.
And, from like, how are you doing today to a technical question about a specific thing they're a subject matter expert on.
Right.
And anything in between. And we didn't really have a specific use case, whereas Cameo's use case is very specific, which is like you have a friend, you want to buy them a shout out from their favorite celebrity.
Yeah.
And
I think that's
$100 or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight because that was actually a problem, right? Like our users would come up to us and say like, I don't know what to ask this person, or like, I don't know what to ask. And sometimes in the formation of the community though, those types of things become norms. Like it becomes a community norm. So this community asks about tech.
Right.
So I know like to go check each person's bio and then ask them a question about their business or, their position, right? Like their role in a company or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. We didn't have a specific use case, and the use case really came out of the Snapchat, right? Like the Snapchat Q&As you were doing.
Right, which is kind of a unique thing. It wasn't something that many people were doing. I was on Snapchat at the time doing Q&As with this audience of, I guess, young wannabe entrepreneurs or maybe young entrepreneurs. And people would ask me questions, and that was fun, but it wasn't something that was like everybody was doing, or it was a widespread consumer phenomenon.
Right.
So we threw in the towel. I mean, it was a beautiful app, sadly. Like we made a really beautiful app, but it didn't work. And we kind of threw in the towel on that. And then we decided you took the team and built this Poly app.
Yeah.
Which is like
which is crazy.
Kind of a polling quiz app on Snapchat.
Yeah. Polling quiz app on Snapchat. So Snapchat has this thing called Snapkit. I like to explain it as the first Snapkit app before Snapkit existed. So Snapkit came into existence because of what we, I guess, as a team, figured out how to do on Snapchat, which is essentially take an anonymous polling app and show people how to attach it to their story using the attachment tool as a hack to get our distribution on Snapchat stories. And it was very simple.
And went crazy viral.
I had never seen anything like that.
Tens of millions of people used it.
I think in the end there was about 100 million people used it to vote on polls.
Yeah.
And I think there was like 20 million people who actually created a poll.
And this is like in the course of 2 months or something.
Yeah, it's a couple of months. But again, a huge lesson in sort of virality does not equal success. And retention is all that matters, right?
Because it was something people would try once and then they would just, it was okay, but not, the most compelling thing.
Exactly. They weren't coming back. It wasn't a retentive use case, right? Like people weren't using it again and again. And that's what you need for a company to be successful, or a product to be successful. You just need to build something that people use every day or people use a lot.
So you've been doing startups for 5 years. What are the, continuous startups? Some of them got significant traction, but then didn't work. Some of them got no traction. And
No
didn't
traction,
work.
yeah.
And some of them remains to be seen. But what were the big life lessons from all of this?
I think one of them I said, right? Like, I think try to solve a problem you're passionate about, which is hard for me to do, again, because I'm a creative and I like ideas, but try to think about the problems you're solving. The second thing is that the biggest thing I learned personally for me was like, it feels like the end of the world almost every day. Because something is going wrong, and it always feels like, oh, it's the end, and like I'm not gonna come back from this. Even with all the ups and downs, and like especially with the failures, like after you get back up, you kind of build up strength, right? I think that resilience, I think I got from Sri Lanka as well, but like doing this, I really got that, where now I know like I can figure out a way to get up. And I think that's like a lifelong gift that I got from my startup, right? That I don't think you get at a big company or doing something easier. The third thing is I do think it's a hard path for, and people need to be realistic about that, because I think in Silicon Valley, I think that there's like this aura and like, it's all unicorns and rainbows kind of vibe when it comes to entrepreneurship, like that people think it's going to be like that, or they think their company is going to be like that, including me. When I started, I was like, oh no, I'm going to be the exception, like my company's going to do great. And you learn very soon that that's not the case. But I think you just have to be realistic about sort of the path you're taking, and be prepared to go through the ups and downs of a startup. And the biggest thing from that is you're gonna go through a lot of hard times, and it's every day you're gonna feel like it's gonna all like even if you're successful or not successful, you're gonna feel the same, right? That's the thing that I think you make this kind of relationships with other entrepreneurs who are also doing the kind of following that similar path. Some of them are more successful, some of them are less successful. You're just all in this game together, pretty much. So I think that learning from other people, that whether you're like super successful or not successful, you're all feeling the same kind of things. It was also pretty cool, like just knowing that you're not alone.
And tell me about like the worst time ever starting a startup. Every entrepreneur, I feel like, has one or two moments where they were just at their lowest low.
Yeah. I can't even think of like one, because there's so many.
Yeah.
But I think the pivots were really hard, because like we did so many pivots, and for me, it always felt like I was trained to do this because of music, because you make a record and you put it out, and then it's popular for a while. There's no retention for music, right?
Yeah.
Like there is retention, like people do listen to it, but like the average curve is like people listen to it a lot and then like not much, but there's like a long tail, right?
Yeah.
And how you grow is just by doing something new and keep doing new things, right? So it's almost like you're starting over again and again.
Yeah. You're always starting from
scratch. Right? Like nobody cares like that your last record came out 5 years ago and it was popular, right? Like that kind of fades away. I think in startups, that's hard, especially for your team and people who are not used to that.
Yeah.
Right? And like, it felt like we were, launching this thing, working on that community, and then like it would grow to a certain extent, and then we would evaluate, is this growing fast enough or not? Or like, what do we want to do with it? Here's our plan. But then we would think, it's not working. Let's do something new, right? When you do that 5, 6, 7, 8 times, like it really burns some people out, right? And including myself, right? Really. I think that was hard. And I guess like you got to figure out if you're doing this kind of lab kind of startup, like that's the journey you're in
Right, you need
for.
people to be prepared for that.
For that, exactly. At the start. Instead of like coming to do one thing and then now we're doing this other thing and then the other thing and the other thing. I think that is super hard for some people. For me, it was not that bad because I think because of music.
So in some ways, music is a good training ground to just try and fail at startups.
Yeah, because like most of your records fail, right? For most musicians.
Yeah.
Right? Like think about like how many you would work on versus how many become quote unquote hits.
I guess that's true. People don't think about it in that way because mostly you're just listening to the hits on radios or whatever.
Exactly.
I guess even successful artists put out a lot of tracks and then only a few of them become
very few
lasting.
Yeah. Maybe 1%.
How does that feel for artists?
I think it's hard because you're putting in like your creative energy to every song. And like if you ask any artist and most DJs or whatever, they'll be like, oh, my last record is the best one I've ever done. Right?
Really? So they actually think that. People believe that. They're
Yeah.
If you put out an album and it has 12 tracks,
right,
and you think everyone's great.
Yeah.
Even though probably only 3 are great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? And then people really understand like what they gravitate to and like the community does like picks it for you almost, right?
Yeah.
Versus what you think is going to be hot.
Why hasn't anyone... I guess I think I heard of an app that was trying to do this, but basically lets you preview your tracks. Like if you had an album of 10, 20 tracks, you could just preview them with your hardcore fans so you could know which ones are good and then just
cut the other
ones.
But even if you do that, the next iteration, you're going to have another 3 that they pick. And then when you put those 3 and the other 3, they're still going to prefer some of them, right?
Yeah.
So you can do that. And I think a lot of record labels like do... this kind of pre-screening and stuff like that. But I think it's still with things like music, creative stuff, like the community at the end of the day decides what's good and what's not.
Yeah.
What they gravitate to. And you don't really have control over that. All you can do is like say, okay, I gave it my best shot. Here you go. What do you think? And put yourself out there. And then sometimes they're just going to shit on it. And actually most of the time they're just going to be like, meh, that was okay. Right? And sometimes it's just something resonates and catches on and it just like goes from there.
So do you think for artists you need a fair amount of resilience to keep going?
Oh yeah, a lot.
I guess there must be like a pretty significant internal drive. People saying, hey, I want to make this music because I'm intrinsically motivated to.
Right.
So fuck what you think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think you really, really need that. And I think the music industry is just like a hard place if you're not tough. People are gonna say stuff about you. There's always gonna be critiques that you're not gonna agree with. And there's just like a lot of shit goes wrong. And you just have to keep getting up. Like, I'll give you one example, right? Like the first time I went to the UK to play a show, super excited, first time, packed show, like 500 people outside, couldn't get in, right? But guess what? Like, I don't have a manager or tour manager, none of that. I just go with my buddy who's another musician. We play the show, like, we are super happy. The promoter just disappears. He's not there. So we didn't get paid.
He just ghosted you.
He just ghosted, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, I came from another country to this place, sold out a show, did all this stuff, and then like you don't get paid and you just got to figure out how to get home again.
Oh my God.
Right?
That's shady.
Yeah, right? The day before I put my second album out, one of the writers, we don't have like quote unquote like professional managers, right? So you kind of like do all the paperwork and stuff yourself. And this guy's like friends with me for a while. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to put this out. I'll, get it signed when I go to pay him. And I'll just get it signed later, right? Like he's my friend or whatever. Like I would go to his house and hang out with his kids and stuff like that. I get a call from another record label saying, you can't put your album out. I'm like, why? I made the whole record. Some people wrote some lyrics on it, but like I pretty much did everything else. like, this song is owned by us and we are going to block your album. So what happened was, like, that writer signed a deal with them and signed that song over, the lyrics to that label, without telling me.
Yeah.
And I got to know the day before like, it's pressed. Everything is ready to go. It's going to stores tomorrow. I'm like trying to do promo.
They told you the day before.
Yeah.
What did you do?
So I pretty much went back to him, the writer, and said, like, just worked out a deal with him.
Yeah.
And told him to go to the label and say, like, no, I, like, signed this over. This is carved out from my deal. Because he signed a blanket deal, right? Like, not that song particularly. It's
but like every song.
As a writer, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just ask you a few more questions. One was founding a company and having a kid at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a incredibly difficult proposition. I can't imagine doing it. You know, I've just had a kid, and that seems very tough. Like, you went through it for the whole first year, right, of Renomi's life. Like, how was that?
It was hard because I think being present is really hard when you're working on your own company. So I found myself a lot of times when I was, like, hanging out at home, just either, like, very stressed or, like, thinking about the company a lot. And I really had to, like, work on it to be present. I think that was kind of the hardest part. And then, like, just the uncertainty of it all. I think, like, really I got through because my wife had a pretty stable job, and that helped. Because I think if she didn't do that, and, like, my entire family was reliant on me and that startup working, I think that would have been even harder. And I'm sure some people go through that as well.
Yeah. So having a support network with Kumi.
Yeah, I think Kumi was pretty much the reason that I was able to do startups, right? Because she, worked at a job and, like, got us health insurance and all that. So at least that stress wasn't there, but it still felt like, as a dad, you feel like you need to take care of your family, and, like, sometimes feeling like, well, I'm in this and making this sacrifice, but because of that, I'm not really the breadwinner, and I can't really. That was hard too, right? As I guess, like, a dad or a man, right?
Yeah.
Like, just being like, I can't really do that right now. But I think the reason, the benefits of that, you don't see, like, it's almost like when you're doing a startup, you don't see what you learn.
Yeah.
And how much you're growing at all. Because just time seems like it's stopped. Like, you're just solving. Every day is
I get that.
Yeah.
After 10 years of starting companies, I remember thinking, I don't have any skills.
Yeah.
Like, I did not learn anything this entire time. I'm, like, not qualified to do any job.
Yeah.
And that was just like a dead period.
Right.
And then it was only afterwards that I realized, oh, actually, I am, much better at understanding how business works. I'm a much better programmer. I'm a functional manager, like all these things that I didn't even realize I was learning.
Exactly. So that was also, for me too. I went through the same thing where I felt like I'm not qualified to do anything because I left my, like, finance, like, what I was trained to do a mishmash of things.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't even know what job I would apply for now, right? What are my skill sets? But then you figure out the resilience of, like, being able to stand up and figure out, okay, well, these are the skills that I got during the startup, and this is what I kind of want to do. I mean, you just kind of learn so much that you don't really know until you go out and start talking to people that weren't in the startup world.
Yeah.
Right?
So I guess my last question is, do you have any practices or ways that you have cultivated that resilience in your life now that I think that you've been in a lot of situations that have built that resilience in you, but are there any things that you've done to consciously cultivate it?
Yes. So I think the discipline aspect of when I start committing to something, I'm pretty disciplined about it. I can kind of go through, almost take the pain and, like, keep going. That I think started, all the way in pretty much Sri Lanka with sports, and like my dad sort of establishing a very clear schedule of discipline at home.
Yeah.
I think that has kind of continued on. So like when I set a goal that is like an achievable real goal for me, I kind of try to break it down and like get to it in steps. And I think that really helped with startups as well as kind of whatever I have achieved. So a good example is like if I had set up like a weight goal or some sort of like physical goal, or say like I signed up to not drink for 1 month period of time. I'm pretty good about like not giving into temptation and just like sticking to it and hitting the goal. So I think that has helped. I think I don't have a great meditation practice like you do, but I have taken up running, which is pretty, like it feels like meditation. And I try to like do breath practice while I run as well.
So you're consciously controlling your breathing.
Yeah.
Is there a guide that you read to that, or
it's just something I figured out. Like it's like, okay, well, this is one of the only times in the day, or that 45 minutes is when I get the time for myself, and you're like solo, right, running on the road or like in a park, and it just felt a natural kind of time that I can take to also do the breath practice.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned was I grew up Buddhist in Sri Lanka, so like like meditation, it doesn't matter. Like it's about just being present in the moment, and
right. You don't need formal practice.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, exactly. And then you don't need to be in a specific posture or anything like that. Like I think a lot of people think that you have to do the lotus posture.
Right, yeah.
Like you have to do all this stuff. That's not what meditation is. I think the real meditation is just being conscious and like being in the moment. Right.
Yeah, I think that people, especially Americans, almost need to go through the more like their conception of meditation, right? They have to go through the trappings of meditation, so like sitting quietly and practicing, focusing on the breathing as a way to even get familiarized with the idea that of meditation being a practice that you can do all of the time, and being focused and I guess present in their present moment experience.
Yeah.
I found that for myself. I didn't start noticing those things in the world. Like I didn't start really being present more of the time in the world until I had that on the cushion experience.
Yeah.
That was my conversation with Ranidu. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I really loved hearing his stories about growing up and getting into the nascent Sri Lankan pop music industry. So if you like the podcast, please rate me 5 stars on iTunes and hit me up on Twitter @Justin Khan if you have any feedback or want to send a message. Otherwise, I will see you next week, and I love you all.